There's a certain kind of silence you only hear in the mountains, the kind that presses against your ears like velvet, broken only by the cry of a hawk slicing across the sky or the distant rush of a stream cutting through the rocks. And every time I return to my mountain mansion, that silence wrapped around me like a promise. Freedom, privacy, a retreat carved out of the wilderness where the rest of the world couldn't touch me. My grandfather used to say, "Up here, the mountain belongs to no one but the man who tends it." And I lived by that. I built my mansion on a high ridge, every beam and window designed to honor the land, with broad decks that overlooked valleys stretching for miles, fireplaces that roared with the snap of pine logs, and a private road so steep and winding that anyone who made it to the top had earned their right to be there. It was mine, legally, lawfully, in every sense that mattered, which made it almost laughable the first time Karen, the self-crowned tyrant of the Mountain Crest HOA, showed up at my gate with her clipboard and demanded I pay association dues for my property. I remember standing on the gravel drive, leaning against the split-rail fence, as she rattled off a list of infractions: not painting my shutters to match community standards, having a flagpole that wasn't pre-approved, and even, she claimed, allowing my driveway to be non-compliant because I didn't use the same crushed granite her HOA required. I told her flat out, calm and steady, that my property wasn't part of her HOA, that my land was platted decades before her neighborhood ever existed, that her bylaws meant nothing to me. But Karen didn't blink. She smirked, lips tight, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses, and muttered, "Everyone pays eventually, you'll see." At first I ignored the letters that came in the mail. Ridiculous fine notices with bold red print claiming I owed $5,000, then $15,000, then $50,000 for non-compliance. Each one stamped with the HOA's logo as though it gave them authority they didn't have. I laughed when I saw them, tossing them straight into the fireplace. But as the weeks rolled on, the letters turned into certified mail, the language more aggressive, threatening liens, foreclosure, even demolition for repeated refusal to comply. I'll admit, that one made me pause. Demolition? They thought they could bulldoze my home because I wouldn't cut them a check for rules that never applied to me? I called my attorney, who assured me it was all smoke, empty threats designed to scare people into paying. He said, "They've got no jurisdiction. Ignore them." And I did. Until Karen herself showed up again, this time with 2 board members in tow, all 3 of them standing at the end of my driveway in pressed blazers like they were on some kind of corporate field trip, holding a folder thick with papers. She waved it at me and sneered, "Last chance. Pay the fines or face consequences. The board has voted unanimously to enforce compliance." I laughed right in her face. Enforce what? Your little neighborhood rules? This is my land. This mansion stands outside your reach. Get off my property. Her smile never faltered, but there was a gleam in her eye, sharp and mean, as she turned on her heel and called over her shoulder, "You'll regret this. We always win." Watching her walk away that day, I should have known she had something planned, something bigger than letters and threats. I should have known she wasn't bluffing. But standing on my porch, the mountain air cool on my face, my dogs lounging at my feet, I couldn't imagine anyone being bold or stupid enough to actually test me on my own land. I had no idea that Karen was about to make the biggest mistake of her life, one that would shake the entire community to its core, and end with her standing in front of a crowd realizing she hadn't picked a fight with just another homeowner. She had picked a fight with the governor of the state. It was early morning when I first heard the sound. At first it was faint, just a dull, mechanical roar carried up the valley. But as I drove the winding road toward my property, the noise grew louder, heavier, like an angry beast chewing its way through the mountain air. And my stomach sank, because I knew it didn't belong. Up here, there were no highways, no construction projects, nothing but the quiet of nature. So the moment I rounded the last bend and saw the dust rising, a thick brown cloud billowing against the sunrise, my pulse spiked with dread. I pressed the gas harder, tires spitting gravel as I tore up the last stretch of road. And when I came around the corner, what I saw froze me in my seat. My mansion, the home I had poured years into, the retreat that stood as a testament to my family's history and my own hard work, was being torn apart piece by piece under the crushing arms of yellow bulldozers. The deck where I used to drink my coffee was already splintered. The grand stone chimney was being shoved sideways, and windows shattered like gunshots as the machines plowed through. Workers in hard hats moved about casually, shouting to each other, as if they had every right to be there, as if my land, my home, was theirs to destroy. For a moment, all I could do was sit there gripping the wheel, my knuckles white, rage boiling so fast it nearly stole my breath. Then I slammed the truck into park, jumped out, and stormed down the drive, my voice thundering across the noise of engines. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" One of the operators shut down his machine long enough to lean out the cab and shrug, shouting back, "Orders from the HOA, sir. Demolition permit approved." I could barely process what I was hearing. Demolition permit? On my land? My name wasn't on any permit. No court had signed off. This was madness. I pushed past the workers, some of them backing away nervously as they caught the fire in my eyes, and I made straight for the woman standing in the middle of the chaos in her spotless suit jacket and perfect hair, arms folded across her chest as if she were overseeing some grand triumph. Karen. She was smiling. Smiling as the walls of my living room came crashing down, smiling as the home my grandfather helped me build collapsed into rubble. "You've left us no choice," she said smoothly when I got close enough to hear her over the rumble. "Months of non-payment, repeated violations. The board voted unanimously to enforce demolition, and as you can see, we don't bluff." I was shaking with fury, every word scraping out of me like gravel. "You don't have authority here. This land isn't yours, this house isn't yours, and no damn HOA has the power to demolish private property without legal cause." She tilted her head, her smile widening like a knife being twisted. "You'd be surprised what we can do when people refuse to cooperate. Everyone else falls in line, but you thought you were special. Now you'll learn." For a heartbeat, I wanted nothing more than to drag her off my land myself. But instead, I pulled out my phone, snapping photos, videos, recording every detail. The machines, the workers, the smug queen bee orchestrating the destruction. "You think this is a win?" I said, my voice trembling with the kind of calm that hides a storm. "This is the biggest mistake of your life." She actually laughed, turning to one of her board members beside her. "He's bluffing, just like when he said he'd fight this. All bark, no bite." Behind us, another crash split the air as the last of my roof gave way, beams snapping like bones, dust and debris raining down where my great room once stood. Neighbors had begun gathering at the edge of the property, some wide-eyed with shock, others whispering to each other with nervous excitement, as though they couldn't decide whether to be horrified or entertained. One man muttered, "They can't do this, can they?" But Karen shot him a glare sharp enough to silence him on the spot. I stood there watching my home crumble, the smell of sawdust and smoke choking the air, and in that moment, something inside me hardened. I realized Karen wasn't just reckless, she was delusional, convinced that her little fiefdom of power stretched farther than the law, farther than reason, and she thought I was just another pawn she could bully into submission. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't powerless. I wasn't some isolated homeowner she could steamroll. I had the law, the people, and the full weight of the state behind me, because I wasn't just a man watching his mansion fall apart. I was the governor, and Karen had just declared war on the wrong person. The thing about power is that it doesn't always announce itself with flashing lights and sirens. Sometimes it waits, quiet and patient, until the exact right moment to change everything. And as I stood among the ruins of my mountain mansion, watching the smug satisfaction on Karen's face and the uneasy stares of my neighbors, I knew that my moment was coming. I didn't storm into the chaos waving a title or screaming about my office. No, I let her bask in her arrogance, let her believe she had won, because the downfall of someone like Karen had to be thorough. It had to be a collapse so absolute that no one would ever forget it. For the next 48 hours, I stayed quiet. I gathered every scrap of evidence. Photos, videos, witness statements from neighbors who had seen the bulldozers roll in without proper permits, documents Karen had handed me claiming authority she didn't have. I filed it all carefully, methodically, while Karen strutted around the neighborhood boasting about finally putting the troublemaker in his place. The HOA board held a little gathering the next evening on the clubhouse lawn. Karen, center stage, sipping wine like a conquering general, her board members nodding along as she declared victory. "He thought he was untouchable," she told them, her voice carrying just far enough for me to hear from the edge of the crowd. "But in this community, nobody is above the rules. Not him, not anyone." People clapped nervously, unsure whether to celebrate or cringe. But Karen didn't notice. She was too wrapped up in her own fantasy of control. That's when I stepped forward, calm and unhurried, letting the chatter die as I approached. She spotted me, smirked, and said loudly, "Come to see what real authority looks like?" I looked at her for a long moment before I answered, my voice steady enough to cut through the tension. "No, Karen, I came to remind you what real authority actually is." The silence that fell then was heavy, expectant, all eyes flicking between us. I pulled from my jacket a folder, the same one I had handed to my attorney earlier that day, the same one now stamped with the state seal, and held it up for everyone to see. You may not realize it, but the man you've been threatening, the man whose home you demolished without a shred of lawful authority, isn't just your neighbor. He isn't just a homeowner. He is the sitting governor of this state. For a beat, no one moved. Karen laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound, but it faltered as she noticed the ripple moving through the crowd, the gasps, the hushed whispers, the phone snapping up as people began recording. One of our own board members went pale, stammering, "Governor? You mean he's... I stepped closer, laying the folder on the table in front of her. "You destroyed the property of the state's highest elected official. You trespassed. You falsified permits. You abused your position to orchestrate a crime of staggering arrogance. And you did it all in broad daylight with an audience thinking no one could touch you." Her face drained of color, the smug curve of her lips collapsing into a trembling line as she opened the folder and saw the truth staring back at her. My name, my office, my authority, sealed and undeniable. I didn't need to raise my voice. The weight of the words was enough. "You wanted to make an example of me, Karen? Congratulations, you did. But it's not the lesson you think it is." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder now, neighbors pulling out their phones to call family, reporters already tagging social media posts with my name, the HOA board members shifting uncomfortably under the weight of the revelation. Karen tried to rally, tried to summon that smug tone again. "This doesn't change the fact you ignored the rules," she began, but I cut her off with a raised hand, sharp and final. "Rules? No, Karen. What you enforced wasn't rules. It was fantasy. It was tyranny dressed up in bylaws. And now the law will have its say." I gestured, and two men stepped forward from the crowd. Not neighbors, not board members, but state troopers who had been waiting just outside at my request, uniforms crisp, expressions hard. They moved to my side, their presence like thunder rolling in before a storm, and Karen's eyes widened as the realities sank in. This wasn't a bluff. This wasn't theater. This was the power she had mocked, now standing over her, ready to strip away everything she thought she owned. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The mountain itself seemed to stand taller as the truth settled over the valley, the silence once again returning, broken only by the sound of Taryn's world crashing down around her, just as surely as she had demolished my home. But the difference was this. My house could be rebuilt. her reputation, her influence, her power, they were gone forever. The days that followed were nothing short of a reckoning, the kind of reckoning that strips illusions from people and leaves only truth in its wake. And for Karen and her little cabal of HOA loyalists, the truth was devastating. The morning after the confrontation at the clubhouse, state investigators swarmed the neighborhood, their unmarked cars and official SUVs lined along the winding roads like sentinels. Agents with clipboards and cameras documenting every infraction, every illegal order, every falsified permit Karen had waved around like a sword. Neighbors stood in clusters on their lawns, whispering, filming on their phones. The same people who once trembled under Karen's iron grip, now watching with a mix of fascination and relief as the mighty Queen Bee found herself pinned under a microscope she couldn't wriggle out from. Karen tried, of course. Oh, she tried. She stormed into the investigator's path, demanding to see warrants, claiming diplomatic immunity of some ridiculous sort as president of the HOA, waving her clipboard as if it held the weight of law. But every word only dug her hole deeper, because the more she protested, the more obvious it became to everyone that her authority was nothing but smoke and mirrors. The board members who once backed her so loyally began to peel away, each of them squirming as investigators uncovered emails, meeting notes, and financial records that tied them to her schemes. One broke down in tears on the curb as he admitted Karen had coerced him into signing off on fines and penalties he knew were baseless. Another quietly handed over boxes of files, eager to cut a deal. By the end of the week, the HOA board was shattered, its so-called leaders scattered and desperate, and Karen was left alone, her empire reduced to ashes before her very eyes. And me? I didn't gloat, didn't strut around rubbing salt in the wound. I had something far more powerful: dignity, the quiet strength of a man who had let the truth speak louder than vengeance. When the press came, because of course they came, hungry for the story of a rogue HOA demolishing the home of the sitting governor, the cameras followed me to the rubble of my mansion, where I stood tall, boots planted firmly on the land that had been in my family for generations, and I told the world exactly what had happened. I spoke of abuse of power, of neighbors bullied into submission, of how communities collapse when small tyrants are allowed to run unchecked. I didn't have to name Karen outright. Her face was already plastered across every headline, her downfall feeding the very media machine she once thought she could manipulate. The people cheered not just for me, but for the principle that no one, no matter how petty or powerful they think they are, is above the law. And then came the sweetest part: rebuilding. I brought in crews, not with the arrogance of HOA board members dictating aesthetics, but with the vision of someone who understood the value of freedom and resilience. Together, we cleared the rubble, salvaged what we could, and laid the foundation for something greater, something grander, a new mansion that rose from the ruins like a phoenix from ash. Bigger decks, taller windows, stone walls that stood as a declaration to the mountain itself: you cannot break what belongs to the truth. Neighbors came to watch, many offering help, others just standing by with tears in their eyes, because for them, this was more than a house. It was proof that the reign of terror was over, that the mountain had finally been freed from Karen's grasp. Months later, when the final beam was set and the house stood gleaming against the horizon, I hosted a gathering on the deck overlooking the valley. The air was crisp, the fire pits blazing, laughter spilling out across the mountain like it hadn't in years. The sheriff came, shaking my hand firmly, reminding me that sometimes the law needs a human face to remind people it still has teeth. Families brought food, kids ran along the grass without fear of violations, and for the first time, the mountain community felt like a community again. Karen, meanwhile, faced her fate. Criminal charges piled up: fraud, trespassing, property destruction, conspiracy, and the courts had no sympathy. She had stood too tall, reached too far, and now the very system she mocked had come crashing down on her. Last I heard, she was staring down years of legal battles, her reputation shredded beyond repair, and her name was a punchline in every HOA horror story across the country. And as for me, I didn't need revenge. I had something better: justice, restoration, and the satisfaction of knowing that the mountain was mine again, not through fear or control, but through the simple, undeniable power of truth. When I looked out over the valley from my rebuilt mansion, the sun dipping low behind the peaks, I thought of my grandfather's words. Up here, the mountain belongs to no one but the man who tends it. And I smiled because he had been right all along. Karen thought she owned power. She thought she could bend the mountain to her will. But in the end, all she managed to do was destroy herself and leave me standing stronger than ever, a governor not just of the state, but of my own destiny.